In Chapter 10, you will learn about the Vanishing Americans. This chapter covers the English penetration of the continent, the Indian removal, which included the Trail of Tears, the Plains Wars and the reservations with violations of the treaties. The chapter also covers separatism to Anglo-conformity, cycling between Anglo-conformity and cultural pluralism, pan-Indian responses and initiatives, a discussion on whether they are immigrants or colonized minorities, and finally, the assimilation and successes of the American Indian. Between 1990 and 2000, there was an increase of 4.1 million persons. By 1996, the U.S. government recognized 318 tribes in the 48 states and 226 Alaskan tribes, and there were an additional Indian group seeking official recognition. We can glean from that the American Indian has not vanished. At first, diseases, wars, and alcohol, as well as the industrial civilization, weakened their populations to a low of over 270,000 in the 1900s. It was considered the greatest demographic disaster since the arrival of the Europeans. However, instead of disappearing, there has been an increase in their numbers and is the fastest growing ethnic group in America today. This group has worked to keep its culture, restore lost languages, and their different identities. Let's take a look at the English penetration and some of the American Indian policies. At first, the main interest of the French and English were the furs. They traded with the Indians for guns, clothing, alcohol, and jewelry. Between 1754 to 1761, there was a war between the French and the Indians. At first, the Iroquois were neutral, but the English attacked. The result after the war brought a flood of settlers to the area. Chief Pontiac and the Delaware Prophet tried to get the Indians to give up trading with the white man and to create intertribal military organizations to fight them. Chief Pontiac was killed in 1769. Before that, in 1763, a proclamation declared that all land west of the Appalachian Mountains was Indian country, and any settlers west of the Appalachians who did not have legal title must return to the colonies, and all future land purchases from the Indians had to be conducted in public with representatives from the king. However, there was defiance of the proclamation. George Washington allowed the frontiersmen to settle those lands, much to the discontent of the Indians. We know that many treaties that existed were widely violated. An example cited in the text is the 12 tribes that surrendered about 50 million acres of Ohio to the United States. The Indians received a certain quantity of goods and were promised future payments for their land. As the population grew, they just took more and more. Leaders Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa continued Chief Pontiac's call for the Indians to turn away from the white man's way and to keep them from losing more land. Many of the older chiefs were not influenced to become friends with their traditional enemies. The War of 1812 began after Tecumseh's warriors fought with Harrison's forces. Several legal issues forced the Indians to be removed from their lands. In Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee tribe was not a foreign nation and could not use the state of Georgia and could not sue the state of Georgia. They were forced to give up 60 million acres of land. The case of Worcester versus Georgia determined that Georgia could pass laws that replaced the laws of the Cherokee. Chief Justice Marshall stated that the Indian tribes were domestic dependent nations. In other words, they were sovereign nations. However, there were limits to their sovereignty. There were tribal powers which allowed them to make treaties, protect them from trespassers, and benefit from basic protections with respect to the United States. President Jackson ignored the Supreme Court's rulings and was clear that he would impose the Indian Removal Act, which continued in the 1840s. Indians were given no choice. This was considered one of the most dishonorable periods in American history. The Indians felt like the U.S. had broken the basic principles of fairness and justice. Due to the tragedy of losing their ancestral grounds, some Indians decided to fight. In the end, 4 tribes decided to move to Indian Territory. They were moved hundreds of miles along what is known as the Trail of Tears. Their removal resulted in over 15,000 deaths and took almost 20 years. The 5th tribe, the Seminoles, refused to move. That war lasted nearly 7 years with deaths estimated between 1,500 and 2,000 soldiers and cost the U.S. at least $20 million. There were many problems as people moved into Indian Territory. The U.S. could not get supplies in a timely manner. Consequently, there was no protection against these wild tribes, and no matter how fearlessly the Indians fought, they were outnumbered and outgunned. Since the beginning, when the Pilgrims arrived, the federal government personified the idea that the Indians and the whites should be kept apart. That was seen with the creation of the reservation system. As time went on, others doubted the wisdom of separatism and called for the Indians to be helped to become civilized. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was created in 1824 to oversee funds for the development of the Indians. They have enormous power to oversee the lives and property of the Indians. The Dawes Act, also known as the Allotment Act, provided for surveying the reservations and dividing the lands into strips to be given to members of the tribes. Anything left over was proclaimed extra and could be sold. The money received for those sales would be held in a trust, and after 25 years, they could receive a certificate of competency. And they would get a title to that plot of land and citizenship. Interesting that the land was theirs first and they were here first. However, after 25 years, it could be determined to be legal. There was so much cheating and fraud between 1887 and 1934 that it is estimated that Indians lost over 87 million acres of land. Agents had so much power, similar to the power that was traditionally that of the chiefs and of the tribal councils. If they felt that the Indians were not moving reasonably towards Anglo-conformity, they could withhold funds. The Dawes Act reinforced policies designed to promote the culture of the dominant culture, while obliterating the Indian cultures. Part of civilizing the Indians included educating the Indians. As the Indians were restricted to the reservations, it became important to build and operate Indian schools. There were 2 kinds of reservation schools: day schools and boarding schools. The goal was to remove children from their tribal surroundings and transform Indian children into assimilated citizens of the United States. Along with educating to civilize the Indians, there were programs to Christianize them as well, convert them away from their native religious beliefs and practices. Their ghost dance religion promised the Indians that white people could disappear. This belief scared whites, and they pleaded for military protection and wanted the ghost dance leaders to be arrested. Sitting Bull was arrested and was killed by two of the Indian officers who took him into custody. News spread, and about 350 Indians, mostly women and children, ran away towards the Pine Ridge Reservation. The leader, Bigfoot, was captured by the 7th Cavalry and ordered to go to Wounded Knee. While they were there, they were fired upon, and an estimated 40% of the Indians were killed. These actions were seen as a symbol of poor relations. The policy of Anglo-conformity held steady. The Indian population was under 240,000. Their lands were being sold. Many thought that the Indian problems were solved. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act called for helping the Indians to lead self-respecting, organized lives in harmony with their own aims and ideals as an integral part of American life. The management of Indian affairs definitely took a new direction. Programs were begun to recover some of those lost lands. Monies for college education, developing their Indian languages, revive ancient rituals and ceremonies, and strengthen self-rule were put in place. Meanwhile, the Bureau of Indian Affairs continued to play a strong role in the determination of tribal membership. Consequently, many Indians disliked the Indian Reorganization Act. In 1953, Congress adopted a new policy, the termination policy, and declared Indians should be free from federal supervision and control. What this meant was that they were Indians. They were no longer allowed to receive payments for services for land that they had given up to the government through treaties. The main intent was destruction of tribal governments and disorganization of the tribal life. Several fears from young leaders, they considered their fight to be in some ways part of the greater fight between America's influential society and all other oppressed groups, a fear that their survival as Indians would end. President Johnson in 1968 established the Indian Civil Rights Act. This act established the rights of Indians to remain Indians while exercising their rights as Americans. In 1970, President Nixon disagreed with the federal government that it had the right to terminate its special relationship with the American Indians. By 1978, Congress adopted the Federal Acknowledgement Program, allowing terminated and unrecognized tribes to apply for federal recognition. After the government terminated its Anglo-conformity policy, the American Indian reached an unprecedented level. Let's explore language maintenance, occupations, and incomes. At the time when the Europeans first made contact with the Native American tribes, less than 1/3 identified themselves as American Indians, spoke a language other than English, and less than 3% spoke no English and now have vanished. The Navajo are the largest reservation tribe in the United States, and the majority of those on the reservation use their mother tongue in the home. In school, the language of instruction for the Navajo is their language. When we look at occupations, both on and off the reservation, unemployment among Indians is high and economic hardship is common. The Pine Ridge Reservation is the poorest. The reported level of unemployment on this reservation in 1995 is an appalling 75%. To lower these numbers, the tribes have created jobs through gaming. Reservations have no sales or property taxes, so they sell cigarettes, gasoline, and other items for low prices. The gaming income has allowed tribes to capitalize to expand the economy on the reservation and in turn not to rely on government payments and financial support. As we come to the end of chapter 10, a few questions to think over. Who is an Indian? How are Native Americans identified? In what ways will or has gaming changed the lives of Indians? Gaming by 1994 was estimated at $6 billion per year. Arizona, for example, has been producing an estimated $1.4 million per year in revenue for the Yavapai Apache tribe, and were refusing to grant permission for some popular games. Here in the Central Valley, the Chukchansi tribe is currently entangled in conflict with membership and financial issues.